Montgomery, Alabama, July 3rd, 1859. They should have waited until morning, but under the weight of that southern moon, swollen, pale, and unblinking, the decision was made. Two figures crouched low in the last wagon of the night, cloaked in shadow and the faint stink of molasses barrels. One of them was barefoot, the other wore boots stitched from Charleston leather. To the sleepy guard at the plantation gate, it looked like another late supply run, nothing unusual, until he noticed the blanket twitch and the shape beneath it wasn't cotton. He stepped forward, lantern held high. The flame flickered in the humidity. Then the blanket slipped. A pale face, a woman's, flashed in the dim light, her lips dry, eyes frantic. But it was the boy beside her that made the guard's blood go cold. Young, no older than 16, dark-skinned, eyes wide with fear, and something more dangerous, something that looked a lot like trust. Then, everything exploded. Runners! A bell was struck. Once, twice, again. Metal on metal, echoing across the plantation like a death sentence. From the main house, dogs barked. From the slave quarters, heads turned. From the stables, the overseer's men mounted fast horses and kicked up trails of dust beneath a sky that was suddenly far too bright. You can almost hear the panic, the wagon tipping, the scream caught in Charlotte's throat, Samuel's heart pounding like a war drum. Imagine you were there, standing by the oak tree near the gate, watching a woman in a servant's cloak leap from a moving cart into the woods, dragging a boy behind her who wasn't supposed to matter, not to her, not to anyone, and yet she ran. They said she was mad. They said she was wicked. They said she'd been possessed by voodoo, bewitched by a slave. But no one ever asked why. Why would the wife of a white overseer risk death to flee with a black boy who legally belonged to her husband? Why now? What had happened in that house, behind those drawn curtains, to make Charlotte Bell break every rule, burn every bridge, and vanish into the swamp with chains still jingling in her ears? Was it love? Was it desperation? Was it revenge? Whatever it was forbidden, and in the deep South, forbidden love didn't just run, it bled. And as the night swallowed them whole, the question hung in the air like smoke. What secret had they uncovered that made death feel safer than staying? By sunrise, the estate was back in order, at least on the surface. Dogs fed, horses resaddled. Overseer Henry Bell stood on the porch, eyes cold, lips tighter than his belt strap. One hand clenched a half-burnt letter, the other held a rifle. He hadn't let go of all night. To outsiders, the Bells had everything: 200 acres of fertile Alabama soil, cotton fields stretching like white waves toward the horizon, a house built with symmetry, columns carved to impress, and a view from every window that screamed ownership. Inside, the floors were imported oak. The furniture was French. A rosewood piano sat in the parlor. The scent of lemon oil and lavender floated through the halls. Charlotte Bell had 3 dresses for every season, a silver comb with her initials engraved. She hosted luncheons for ministers' wives and practiced Chopin while the house servants cleaned bloodstains from her husband's boots. On paper, she was privileged, protected, but paper burns fast. Walk just beyond the polished veranda, 20, maybe 30 paces, and the world changed. The slave quarters. 12 crooked cabins leaned into each other like broken teeth. No windows, dirt floors, heat trapped inside like breath in a coffin. The stench was inescapable. Sweat, mildew, soot, food rotted in buckets, rats scratched under floorboards. Babies cried themselves hoarse as their mothers begged for mercy, from men who had none left to give. This was Samuel's world. He didn't wear boots. He didn't know his exact birthday. He didn't sleep through the night without hearing his father's screams again. The way he begged Henry Bell to stop, to have mercy, to remember they were all God's children. Mercy never came. Henry whipped his father until his back split like wet bark. Then he made Samuel mop up the blood. That's how Samuel became a house slave. Not through privilege, but through punishment. Because, in the twisted logic of slavery, a boy with his father's blood still on his hands was easier to control if kept close. He washed dishes, stoked fires, was told never to look anyone in the eye. But Charlotte noticed him anyway. Imagine this contrast. A woman in satin gloves tapping piano keys with practiced grace, sipping chilled cider from a crystal flute, while just behind her, a boy kneels with raw knees, scrubbing the floor she walks on. Same house, same walls, two people, chained by very different shackles. Charlotte had a husband, but no voice. Samuel had no rights, but too many eyes on him. They shared glances, at first small, accidental, then came the instructions spoken a little softer. The moments he was asked to stay just a little longer. A touch when passing a tray. A question with no answer. Do you miss your father? Nobody asked questions like that. And from that silence, something dangerous grew. Charlotte wasn't like the others. She flinched when Henry beat the housemaids. She wept, quietly, when Samuel once dropped a pitcher and Henry forced him to pick the glass out of his own skin. But empathy in the South could be just as deadly as disobedience, especially when it came wrapped in silk. Because compassion, if not contained, could look a lot like connection. And connection, between master and slave, was the South's most feared disease. The house and the quarters. Lavender and rot. Glass and rust. Freedom and captivity, fused under one roof. You can almost feel the air between them crackle. Charlotte's world smelled of fresh linens and citrus. Samuel's, of ash and iron. But somehow, in secret, those two worlds had begun to overlap. Some nights, Charlotte left candles burning late. Too late. Some mornings, Samuel was seen in parts of the house he had no reason to be. A whisper started in the kitchen. Then it drifted to the stables. Then to Henry himself. He asked nothing, at first. But his silence didn't mean he hadn't noticed. And so, the noose began to tighten. Not around their necks, not yet, but around the very idea that these two people could exist beyond their roles. A mistress and a slave? No. Not in Montgomery. Not in 1859. And as July crept in, thick with heat and tension, everyone on the estate felt it, the sense that something was about to break. A storm in the bones. But what was Henry really planning behind those doors? What punishment had he devised not just for the boy who defied him, but for the woman who betrayed him? Charlotte Bell was never supposed to end up in Montgomery. She grew up in Charleston, not wealthy, but comfortable. Her father was a merchant with too much pride and not enough coin. Her mother died when she was 8. After that, Charlotte was raised among mirrors, expectations, and strict women who believed obedience was the same thing as love. She wanted to read novels. They handed her etiquette books. She wanted to sketch. They handed her gloves. At 16, she was told her purpose. You are a reflection of your family. Choose the right man, and you preserve our name. So when Henry Bell, a widowed overseer with acreage, livestock, and sharp cheekbones, offered her father a marriage proposal, it was less of a request and more of a transaction. They married within 6 weeks. She was 17. He was 38, and Montgomery. It was nothing like the picture Henry had painted. The house was big, yes, but cold. Too quiet. The air always thick with tobacco smoke and the coppery scent of leather. Henry wasn't cruel at first, just distant. He treated Charlotte like a new acquisition, polished, pretty, and ultimately replaceable. There was no warmth, no laughter, just rules, schedules, expectations. He didn't want a wife, he wanted obedience. The years blurred. Charlotte learned how to smile for visitors, how to manage the house, how to nod politely when her husband laughed at cruelty. She kept herself, clean, small, and silent. But silence is not the same as loyalty, especially not when the screams from the whipping post echoed into her drawing room. At first, she pretended not to hear. She closed windows, played the piano, took walks in the orchard during lashings. But then came Samuel. He was brought to the house after his father was beaten nearly to death for standing up to Henry. Charlotte had watched from her bedroom window. That day, her hands trembling as Henry struck again and again, his face blank. And when the man collapsed, she didn't scream. But she remembered. She always remembered. Samuel was assigned to house duty 2 days later. At first, Charlotte said nothing to him. He moved like a shadow, fast, quiet, scared. He never spoke unless spoken to. He flinched when she reached too fast for a teacup. But one morning, she found him in the hallway, collapsed against the wall. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. No one had told her. She brought him bread, water, nothing more. But when their hands touched, just for a second, something flickered. Recognition. Pain. Something deeper. After that, she started noticing everything. The bruises hidden beneath his shirt, the way he walked with his head low, the sound of his breathing when he thought no one was listening, and something in her cracked, because for the first time in years she saw herself, reflected not in a mirror but in a boy who had never been allowed to become a man. The connection was slow. Shared glance over a dinner tray, a whispered question at dusk, a candle burned too long, a visit to the kitchen that lasted 5 minutes too many. She gave him books. He couldn't read, so she read to him, at night, in secret, poems, psalms, passages from her favorite French novel, Thérèse Raquin, a story about love, guilt, and murder. He listened closely, too closely. He asked her what it felt like to be free. She told him she didn't know anymore. One night she asked, "If you could run, where would you go?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said, "Anywhere, anywhere but here." They never spoke of love, but it lingered, heavy in the air, dangerous, forbidden. It wasn't romance, not in the way stories describe it. It was hunger, for agency, for safety, for someone who finally saw them. But love in the South, between a white woman and a black boy, especially a slave, wasn't just illegal. It was a death sentence. And yet, Charlotte kept the letters he gave her, little notes he scratched, into scraps of paper with broken pencil tips. She hid them under the floorboard in the nursery closet. But secrets don't stay buried, not in houses like this. One afternoon, Henry came home early. He saw Samuel leaving the study. He noticed the drawer left open. He noticed how Charlotte's voice cracked when she spoke. That night, the house felt colder than usual. Henry didn't ask questions. He didn't accuse. He simply handed Charlotte a folded handkerchief and said, "You'll want to be clean for the sermon tomorrow. The preacher's bringing guests." Then he walked away, and Charlotte knew. He knew. She didn't sleep that night. She paced the floor, reread the letters, opened the window, closed it again. She could hear Samuel's soft footsteps 2 rooms away, unaware that his hours were now numbered. Her hand hovered over the lamp oil, over the drawer with the keys, over the cleaver in the pantry. But in the end, she didn't reach for any of those. She reached for her bag, and the next morning, while Henry was at the stables, she found Samuel and whispered just one word: "Tonight." Because whatever came next, capture, punishment, death, it would be better than living another day under shutters that hid everything, except the truth. But had someone already heard her plan? Was the house listening? It started with a scent, not the usual ones, not lavender oil, tobacco smoke, or roasted pork drifting from the kitchen. This was different. Something sour, like mold beneath fine wallpaper. like secrets, rotting from the inside out. Charlotte noticed it first. A change in Henry's breathing, the way he stared longer than usual at her gloves, her books, the way she spoke to the maids. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't hitting, he was watching, and that was worse. Because silence, in Henry Bell's world, wasn't mercy, it was preparation. One afternoon, the head cook pulled Charlotte aside. "Mum, I don't mean to overstep, but that boy, you should send him back to the fields." Charlotte blinked. "Why?" The woman just looked at her, eyes wide and pleading. "Because people are starting to talk," and they were. The house slaves whispered behind corners. The field hands avoided Samuel's eyes. The stables buzzed with rumor, soft at first, then louder. "She's in love with the boy. She reads to him. He touches her hand. In a place like Montgomery, whispers could kill." Henry found the first letter on July 1st, folded into the spine of a hymn book Charlotte hadn't touched in months. A single line, scribbled in Samuel's jagged hand. "If we run, I'll follow." That night, Henry didn't eat dinner, didn't speak, didn't drink. He stood outside on the porch for hours, staring into the black trees. Charlotte pretended not to notice. But the next morning, Samuel didn't show up for his chores. She found him behind the smokehouse, bleeding from his mouth, a welt rising across his cheekbone. His shirt was torn, his voice barely a whisper. He said next time, "He'll cut off my tongue." Charlotte, he helped him to his feet. He didn't ask for help, didn't cry. He just said, "He's going to kill us both." Inside the house, nothing changed. On the surface. Dinner was served. Piano was played. The guests arrived for Sunday tea. Charlotte smiled and poured sugar into cups like nothing was wrong. But her hands trembled. She stopped sleeping. Stopped eating. And Henry. He began locking the doors every night. Personally, he walked the halls after dark with his boots on, slow and heavy, like a warning bell. Charlotte could hear them from her bedroom. Click, step, click. Every night. Closer, louder. He didn't say a word to her, but he left the letter open on her dressing table. Next to it, a pair of scissors, still red from use. Not a threat. A promise. Imagine the dread of that house, where every corner could be listening, where every room became a trap, where love, if it even was love, had no air left to breathe. The walls leaned in, the windows felt like eyes. Even the servants stopped speaking above whispers. Charlotte couldn't risk sending another letter. So, she memorized the plan. 1 bag, 2 loaves of bread, a blanket. The back wagon, the one the driver owed her a favor for from years ago. They would leave during the next shipment run, July 3rd. Midnight, 2 days away. But the problem wasn't the plan. It was Henry, because somehow he already knew. That night, as Charlotte passed the parlor, she heard him speaking to someone. Not one of the overseers, not a neighbor, someone quieter, unfamiliar. The voice answered in short, clipped tones, words like trap, confession, whip, lesson. She backed away before they noticed, but her blood was already cold. July the 2nd. The final straw. Henry called for Samuel in the morning, told him to bring the tea tray. Alone. Charlotte watched from the stairwell. She counted the minutes. 5, 10, 12. Then, a scream. By the time she reached the study, Samuel was gone. The chair was knocked over, a cup of tea pooled across the rug. Blood dotted the floor in droplets, like punctuation. Henry stood calmly behind the desk, pouring brandy. "He won't run again," he said, sipping. Charlotte looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time in her life, she saw a man already preparing her grave. That night, she didn't cry. She packed the bag, bread, blanket, a locket with her mother's face. At 11:48 p.m., she slipped out the side door, holding a lantern low. She met Samuel near the shed, barely able to walk but still standing. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded. They made their way toward the back road, where the final wagon was waiting, its wheels already creaking with cargo. Charlotte climbed in first, Samuel after her. They covered themselves in wool sacks, praying their breath wouldn't give them away. From the trees behind them, nothing. No voices, no dogs. Not yet. But something was wrong. The air was too still. The driver too quiet. Charlotte's fingers tightened around the bag strap. Samuel's chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, and just as the wagon rolled past the last checkpoint, a shout, steel boots, barking dogs, a flash of torchlight against the tree line. They were spotted. But who told? Had one of the housemaids been coerced? Had Henry seen them leave? Or had he planned this from the start? The only thing Charlotte knew as the bells rang out behind them was this. They had no way back, only forward, into the night, into the blood, into history. They didn't get far. The wagon jostled hard over a muddy rut. Charlotte held her breath beneath the wool sacks, clutching the bag tight against her chest. Samuel lay beside her, silent, body pressed flat, eyes wide and unblinking. The trees thinned. The road widened. The plantation checkpoint came into view. One guard, lantern in hand, half asleep. For one fragile moment, it seemed they might pass through. But then, the guard stepped forward, squinting. He cocked his head, raised the lantern, just a little higher. Charlotte squeezed Samuel's hand, and then a shout. "Hey, who's in the back?" The wagon jerked to a halt. Charlotte bolted upright. Samuel scrambled after her. From the woods. Dogs. From behind. Hooves. From the house. Shouts. "Runners!" The chase began. They leapt from the wagon, stumbled down the embankment, tore through underbrush with branches slicing at their faces. Charlotte kicked off her shoes. Samuel limped, already bleeding, but he kept going. Feet pounding the dirt like a storm trying to outrun thunder. They made it to the river bend. One breath. Two. Samuel reached for her hand. Then, crack. A whip. From the trees. Then boots. Barking. Screams. The overseers surrounded them. 3 men. 1 dog. Charlotte screamed as they grabbed Samuel by the neck, slammed him into the earth. He didn't fight. Not anymore. He just closed his eyes and whispered, "Don't beg." They dragged her too, by her hair, back toward the plantation, back home, back to Henry. The punishment wasn't immediate. That would have been merciful. No. Henry wanted it slow, deliberate. He ordered Charlotte locked in the root cellar. No light. No water. Just dirt, shadows and spiders whispering along the walls. She could hear the sounds above her, chairs scraping, boots stomping, and sometimes Samuel's voice, screaming, crying, choking. She clawed at the door, tore her fingernails, off on the hinges. No one came. Samuel was tied to the whipping post. Again. But this time, Henry didn't whip him. He handed the lash to another slave, an older man, shaking, face blank. "Do it," Henry growled, "or I'll beat your boy next." The man hesitated. Samuel didn't plead. He turned his head, looked at the man and said softly, "Don't. Let him do it himself." The whip fell from the man's hands. Henry beat them both, with the iron cord lash, with the buckle, with the back of a shovel. When the older man collapsed, Henry threw his body into the pig trough. Samuel. He barely moved, but he never screamed. Not once. 3 days passed. Charlotte lay in the dark, her lips cracked, her mind unraveling. She whispered his name, over and over. Samuel. Samuel. On the 4th night, the door opened. She blinked against the sudden light. The silhouette in the doorway wasn't Henry. It was one of the kitchen girls. Young, trembling, with a candle in one hand and something wrapped in cloth in the other. Bread, water, and a note. "Don't speak. the girl whispered. "He's gone." Charlotte froze. "Gone?" The girl nodded. "They say he ran again, jumped in the river. No body yet." Then she added quieter, "But I don't think he ran." She left the candle behind, and Charlotte sat in the dirt until it burned out, the shadows swallowing her whole. The next morning, Henry stood at the breakfast table, smiling. "I've arranged a visit to Selma," he told her. "Get some rest. A new dress might do you good." Charlotte stared at him. He poured her tea. "Let's put this all behind us." And for a moment, a brief, flickering moment, she almost believed he had won. That silence would replace everything. That the past could be paved over with bricks and smiles. But the house felt different. The rooms whispered now. The piano keys stayed out of tune, and Charlotte, the Charlotte who once obeyed, once smiled, once poured sugar for strangers, was gone. 3 days later, Henry Bell was found in his study, slumped over the desk, foaming at the mouth, a Bible open to the Book of Psalms. "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted." "Poison," the servants whispered. No investigation, no trial, no public hanging. The doctor ruled it a stroke. But the kitchen girl, the one with the candle, later told a different story. Said she saw Charlotte with the teacup. Said Charlotte smiled that day for the first time in weeks. And then she vanished. No one knows what happened next. Some say she walked into the Alabama River and never came out. Others claim she fled north disguised as a Quaker widow, eventually settling in Ohio. A few believe she carried Samuel's name with her, like a prayer, that she told his story in pieces, to anyone who would listen. But there's no grave, no photograph, just a scorched letter found beneath a floorboard after the house burned during the war. 6 words, barely legible. "I never ran, I followed him." They vanished from history like footprints in rain. No arrest, no trial, no official record of what became of Charlotte Bell or the boy named Samuel. The Montgomery Register ran a short piece on July 8, 1859, just a few sentences buried beneath, cotton prices and a church picnic announcement. Local overseer Henry Bell passed suddenly at his residence this week. His widow is presumed to be traveling north to recover with family. No heirs survive. That was it. No mention of scandal, no mention of chains, no mention of a black boy who bled for loving someone he was never meant to touch. And yet, the story refused to die. It passed in whispers, from maid to maid, from field hand to fire circle, from mother to daughter to granddaughter. In some tellings, Charlotte drowned herself the night Henry died, her dress pulled under by the same river that had once tried to devour Samuel. In others, she escaped to Ohio, changed her name, and opened a school for free children of color. Some versions claim she bore Samuel's child, and that the boy's blood runs through a family still living in Alabama today. But none of that can be proven, because Montgomery, like many southern cities, knows how to bury what it's ashamed of. And this story, this scandal, was something no hymn book could cleanse. The house still stood after the war, empty, peeling, smelling of rust and rot. Carpet moths claimed the parlor, termites devoured the stairs, wind whispered through cracks in the windows. But even after the Bell estate was auctioned off, no one would live there long. Tenants moved in and left within weeks. One man, a Confederate officer turned drunkard, claimed he woke every night at 3 a.m. to the sound of dragging chains across the nursery floor. Another said he saw a woman in white, standing at the edge of the garden, mouthing something he couldn't hear, over and over, until he fled barefoot, into the woods. One sharecropper's daughter claimed she followed footprints into the cellar, but they never led back out. They called it cursed, they called it haunted, but what it really was honest. Because buildings remember what people forget. Imagine stepping inside that house today, the piano still there, keys cracked, the floorboards uneven. A scent in the air that doesn't belong in 2025. Old leather, ash, dried blood, and lavender that refuses to fade. You walk past the cellar, past the kitchen, and upstairs. If you're quiet, you might hear it. A breath, a heartbeat, a whisper, run. In the silence that followed Charlotte and Samuel's disappearance, no one asked the right questions. No one asked what Charlotte endured to believe that freedom was worth dying for. No one asked what kind of boy Samuel must have been to make a woman with everything risk losing it all. No one asked how many others like them existed, across plantations, across borders, whose stories were erased because they didn't fit the script, because they weren't just victims. They were complicated, messy, scandalous, human, and history doesn't like its ghosts to be human. The South moved on. Cotton boomed. The war came. Slavery died on paper, but not in the bones of the land. And yet, Charlotte and Samuel remained, not in ledgers or graveyards, but in rumors, in backroads, in the way some locals never let their daughters walk alone past the old Bell property. They say the earth there is still soft, that no grass grows near the whipping post, that on hot July nights, if you stand under the oak tree by the river road, you can see a wagon pass in the dark. No horses, no driver, just two shadows, a boy and a woman, running. She was wicked. He bewitched her. They sinned. They paid. That's how the white folks told it. But in the quarters, in the kitchens, in the corners where truth still dared to whisper, she saw him. He trusted her. They loved when they weren't allowed to. They ran because they had no choice. Charlotte and Samuel weren't saints, but they were something more dangerous than that. They were free. For a moment, by their own choosing, and for people born in chains, even a moment is a revolution. Even a moment becomes a legacy. So if you hear footsteps in the dirt when you're walking alone, if you smell lavender where there are no flowers, if you hear chains but see no slaves, don't be afraid. Just remember, they never made it to freedom, but their story did. Stories like this must never be forgotten. If you believe the past deserves to be heard, not sanitized, then stay with us. Because for every Charlotte and Samuel, there are 1,000 more whose truths are still buried. We're going to dig them up.